Hello, students. It's nice to see you, and welcome to episode 47 of the online YouTube channel. Today, I'm kind of sweaty. It's a little hot, getting warmer and warmer, and yeah. So I apologize for my hairstyle, but it looks pretty good, right? And today's episode is talking about American history, one of my favorite subjects to talk about. And specifically, we're going to be talking about slavery in the United States and some kind of heroes who helped free many slaves. So let's just jump in and get started. It's this title is called The Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman. So Underground Railroad and one person, Harriet Tubman. We're going to talk about both of those things in today's article. So please enjoy. How much do you really know? How much do you know about the Underground Railroad? Have you ever heard about it before? Well, firstly, it wasn't underground. And it wasn't a railroad either. The Underground Railroad was a series of secret paths and safe spaces for slaves to escape from the South to the North in the USA in the late 18th century. Or I should say early 18th century, I think. When President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which was the law that made slavery illegal, the Underground Railroad was no longer needed and ended. But let's look at how it was created and some of the main people who helped free so many slaves. It's hard to find the beginning of the Underground Railroad because there was no clear beginning. However, it started becoming used a lot in the 1800s as slavery spread more and more. Since slavery was illegal in Canada, throughout the whole early history of the USA, slaves have been trying to escape into Canada and be free. During their escapes, they discovered certain families or places that were friendly to them and gave them help. These places are called safe houses. The slaves would assist each other by going back into dangerous Southern territory and teach other slaves about the safe houses and the best possible routes to freedom. These paths became known as the Underground Railroad. The reason why it's called a railroad is that there were secret terminology or code words used to help escaped slaves. These code words always related to railroad words. For example, people who would guide them along the safe path were called conductors. The safe houses were called stations. Station masters were people who would hide slaves in their house. And the slaves themselves were called cargo. It is estimated that over 100,000 people escaped slavery from the southern states and made it to Canada or the free northern states during that time. There were many important people who helped smuggle people through the Underground Railroad, but one of the most important was Harriet Tubman. She was an African-American abolitionist and political activist. She herself was born into slavery, but was always resistant to being a slave. She would frequently defy her masters and even secretly got married. When she was in her 30s, she escaped and became a free woman in the northern states. But that isn't where her story ends. From her 30s, until the slaves were completely freed, she dedicated her life to help slaves escape the South. She made 13 rescue missions back to the South and guided, she was a conductor, over 70 slaves to freedom. She was known for never getting caught and never losing one of her passengers. She was so famous that during the Civil War, the Northern Army requested her help. They asked her to teach them the secret routes so that the soldiers could sneak into the South to fight the Confederate Army. She became a spy for the Northern Army and aided in the victory of the North, which ended the Civil War. After the war, Tubman fought for women's rights and helped Black people get more freedoms in the United States. When she passed away in 1912, she was buried with full military honors, and she was known around the whole country as a hero and legend of the United States of America. There must have been so many untold stories of heroism that we will never know about because those heroes stayed secret. All those conductors and station masters who assisted escaping slaves to freedom will never be known because history doesn't know their names. But the legacy of these people and the passion people have for freedom and for helping others is a part of the culture of America. As we know, the USA is a country that gives the most to charity than any other country, and the values that Americans have are that we need to help one another, and that if you see someone in need, try to lend them a hand. Another inspiring part of the Underground Railroad is that most of the slaves that escaped turned around and helped the railroad. They also signed up to the Northern Army to fight in the Civil War to try and free the rest of the slaves. Once they got their freedom, they didn't give up the fight until everyone was free. I hope we can learn a lot of lessons from those heroes. All right, that's all for the essay. The Underground Railroad is a really inspiring story about people who didn't want to be slaves. They were captured from their places in Africa or other parts of the world, and they were brought to America and forced to be farmers or something worse. And they defied their masters, and they escaped and could be free once they got to Canada or once the northern states made slavery illegal. Actually, let's look at vocab. Then I want to talk about the Underground Railroad a little bit more. So our first word is proclamation. At the beginning of the essay, I talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. This was a law that made slavery illegal. Proclamation is a public or official announcement dealing with a matter of great importance. Emancipation means to be freed from something. So the Emancipation Proclamation was the announcement to free the slaves officially in the USA. The next, it says 13455. I'm sorry about that. The second word, which is number 3, is terminology. Terminology are words used in a particular study. It means vocabulary concerning a specific subject. In the writing, we talk about the secret terminology of the Underground Railroad. They used code words to help slaves escape slavery. Our next word is estimated. This means roughly calculate or judge the value, number, quantity, or extent of. So it means a rough calculation. It says that it is estimated that over 100,000 people escaped slavery on the Underground Railroad. Next is abolitionist. When we talked about Harriet Tubman, I said she was an African-American abolitionist and political activist. An abolitionist is a person who favors the abolition of a practice or institution, especially slavery. Abolish. Do you know the word abolish? It means to get rid of or do away with. So the abolition, an abolitionist is someone who favors abolishing slavery. And of course, Harriet Tubman, she was born a slave. She escaped. She wanted to abolish slavery, and she helped many slaves escape and get freedom. The last word is defy. In the reading, we talked about Harriet Tubman would frequently defy her masters. Defy means to openly resist or refuse to obey. When I was studying about Harriet Tubman, one thing I saw was that she, when she was 12 years old, a slave in her group tried to escape, and the slave master caught that slave and was going to beat the slave, but Harriet Tubman kind of attacked the slave master to try to protect the other slave. So that was kind of the openly resistant attitude Harriet Tubman was like from a very early age, only 12 years old, and already she realizes slavery is wrong and she's fighting to protect other slaves. Before we do our discussion questions, let's talk about the Underground Railroad a little bit more. So a couple interesting points that I found when I was researching was that the Underground Railroad, it's the relationship between the North and the South. Now, when the North said it's illegal to have slaves, some of the slaves would escape to the North and they would be free. However, the Southern states said that's not fair because slavery is okay in the South. If our slaves escape to the North, please send them back to the South. And there was a time of about 20 years, I don't know how many years, but several years where people in the North would have to give slaves back to the slave masters in the South. And what's really wrong is sometimes Southern slave owners would kidnap black people in the North. They would just take black people or black children and they would bring them down to the South and make them be slaves. And of course, the North was not happy about this at all. And so the North said that they would not cooperate with the South anymore. That if a slave escaped to the North, they would basically be protected in the North. Not protected, but the North would not return slaves that escaped. So after that, slaves had a lot more motivation to go to the North states, and also Canada. And that's one of the reasons why the Civil War started happening, is because the North and the South had more and more issues, more and more problems, and then it eventually became a war, a lot of fighting. So the Underground Railroad, it's really popular. You can learn a lot about it. There's even a TV show called The Underground Railroad. I think it's on Amazon Prime. So you might be able to find it on the internet and you can watch it. But yeah, one other point about the Underground Railroad is a really famous escaped slave who became a writer, and he wrote a biography about his life. Let me look up the name. I think his name is Frederick Douglass. Yeah, so Frederick Douglass is a really famous Underground Railroad person. He escaped slavery, and he was the leader of the Underground Railroad in one of the areas of the path along the from south to north. And then he also went to Washington, D.C. and became a leader, which is really amazing. And he wrote a biography. And one thing he talked about in his biography is he didn't like talking about the Underground Railroad. He wanted to keep it a secret because he wanted to protect the slaves. So when it started becoming popular and it was in the newspapers about slaves and safe houses and sneaking up to the northern states, Frederick Douglass was trying to tell newspapers and news media that like, please keep it a secret, stop talking about it, because slaves are going to be caught and safe houses are going to be closed down, which is really, not good for the movement. Okay, let's go to our discussion questions. So discussion question number 1 is, what is your reaction when you think of the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman? So what's your just initial reaction? What do you think about this information? When you hear about it, when you study the Underground Railroad, how do you feel? What's your reaction? Number 2, if you could ask a slave escaping on the Underground Railroad any question, what would you ask them? So imagine you can go back in time to one of the safe houses and you could talk to one of the slaves that are escaping from the South. What kind of question would you like to ask them? What do you want to know about them? Number 3, are there any stories about Japanese people who secretly helped people that became famous? Are there any stories about Japanese people who secretly helped people? Number 4, was there any time in your life that you helped someone or someone helped you? Tell me about that story, that experience, where you helped someone or somebody helped you. I'd love to hear about that story. And finally, question 5, what historic moment from American history are you interested in? So this is just a small part of American history. It's very important, but it's a small part of American history. What other moments from American history are you interested in? All right, guys, that's all for today's lesson. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to your discussion answers. Anyway, good luck, and I really hope you enjoyed this lesson. Bye, everyone. See you.